It is March 19th, 2026, and if you have been watching the headlines coming out of the Middle East this week and thinking you understand what is really happening in this war between Iran and Israel, you need to stop and watch this video from beginning to end, because the story being told in military press conferences and government statements is missing the most important and most alarming chapter. There is a base in the Negev desert in southern Israel that sits at the absolute center of this conflict. A base that Iran has been systematically targeting, learning from, and hitting with greater and greater precision across 4 separate military operations spanning 2 full years. Its name is Nevatim, and the story of what Iran has done to it, and what that means for the direction of this war, is the story that should be dominating every national security conversation on Earth right now. It is not. And by the end of this video, you will understand exactly why that silence is so dangerous. Nevatim Air Base, formerly designated Air Force Base 28, sits 15 kilometers east of Beersheba and covers 50 square kilometers of hardened concrete, buried fuel lines, reinforced hangars, and runways engineered to keep operating under the most punishing conditions of sustained modern warfare. It hosts 3 complete squadrons of F-35I Adir stealth fighter jets, the 140th Golden Eagle Squadron, the 116th Flying Wing Squadron, and the 117th 1st Jet Squadron. These are not ordinary aircraft. The F-35I Adir is Israel's most advanced and most strategically significant weapons platform, a 5th-generation stealth multi-role fighter that forms the backbone of Israel's ability to strike targets deep inside Iranian territory without being detected by radar defense systems. Every strike Israel has conducted against Iranian nuclear facilities since the start of this war, every precision attack on Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps commanders, every mission penetrating Iranian airspace has been flown by aircraft that take off from Nevatim. Beyond the F-35 fleet, the base also houses C-130J Super Hercules transport aircraft, Boeing 707 aerial refueling tankers that extend Israeli jets' operational range far beyond their borders, and electronic intelligence and reconnaissance platforms. And in a detail that carries the most serious possible implications, potentially modified versions of those F-35s that have been certified to carry tactical nuclear gravity bomb systems after the United States Air Force confirmed its own F-35 fleet had been cleared for nuclear weapons delivery in early 2024. Nevatim is not just a military installation. It is the single location in the entire state of Israel where conventional and nuclear strike capability converge. And that is precisely why it has been sitting at the top of Iran's target list for nearly 2 years. To understand how alarming the situation at Nevatim actually is, you need to trace what Iran has done to that base operation by operation, because the arc of this campaign reveals a learning curve that is far more dangerous than any single missile strike. The story begins on April 13th, 2024, when Iran launched Operation True Promise 1, firing approximately 350 projectiles at Israel in what was the largest single attempted drone and missile barrage in recorded military history. 170 drones, 30 cruise missiles, and 120 ballistic missiles, with Nevatim as the primary designated target. The result was widely described as a defensive triumph. Israel, the United States, the United Kingdom, France, and Jordan combined to shoot down 99% of the incoming weapons before they crossed into Israeli airspace. Only 5 Iranian ballistic missiles actually reached Nevatim, damaging a C-130 transport aircraft, a section of unused runway, and some empty storage structures. The base remained fully operational. Israeli defense officials took cameras to the site, pointed to a single small crater near an unfinished concrete structure, and told journalists that the Islamic Republic had spent all that money and all that effort to produce exactly that, one pit in the ground. The narrative was set. Iranian missiles cannot penetrate Israeli defenses. Iran cannot touch Nevatim. Israel is untouchable from above. But Iranian strategists were watching every frame of that outcome. They were cataloging every intercept, studying every radar signature, analyzing every gap in the response timing, and they were not done. On October 1st, 2024, Iran launched Operation True Promise 2, firing approximately 200 ballistic missiles at Israel in at least 2 coordinated waves. This was the largest direct attack on Israeli territory in the entire history of the conflict, and something fundamentally different happened. Independent satellite imagery from Planet Labs, analyzed by a strategic forces analyst at the Center for Naval Analyses, identified at least 33 likely impact craters at Nevatim, with cloud cover likely concealing additional strikes and putting the probable total closer to 40. One missile punched a large hole through the roof of an aircraft hangar near the southern runway. Another struck directly on a taxiway. A support building at the southern end of the base was partially destroyed. Multiple closely grouped impacts were identified around aircraft storage areas. 3 additional ballistic missiles struck Tel Nof Air Base in central Israel, the facility widely believed by open-source intelligence analysts, satellite imagery specialists, and institutions including the Federation of American Scientists to be one of Israel's primary nuclear weapons storage sites, with at least one of those impacts producing secondary explosions consistent with stored munitions detonating. The Israeli Defense Forces acknowledged damage to office buildings and maintenance areas while insisting no aircraft were hit. Israel also appeared to deploy deliberate satellite imagery obstruction over both Nevatim and Tel Nof to prevent independent analysts from fully assessing what had happened. The most alarming interpretation of the October 2024 results came from James Lewis, director of the Strategic Technologies Program at the Center for Strategic and International Studies, in an analysis published by NPR. Lewis concluded that Israel likely made a deliberate decision not to fully defend Nevatim during that engagement, not because the interceptors failed, but because Israel simply did not have enough Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 interceptors to defend both its most critical air base and its major population centers simultaneously. In his assessment, the Iranians had succeeded in overwhelming the system, and the Israelis had been forced to choose between defending Nevatim and defending Tel Aviv. They chose Tel Aviv. They left their crown jewel air base to absorb whatever Iran could get through. Read that again and let it fully land. The most sophisticated layered missile defense architecture ever constructed, backed by the full technological and financial weight of the American and Israeli defense establishments, with Arrow 2, Arrow 3, David's Sling, Iron Dome, and U.S. Navy destroyers all operating simultaneously. And Iran had fired enough missiles in a sophisticated enough sequence that Israel was forced into a triage decision. Between April 2024 and October 2024, Iran's penetration rate at Nevatim went from approximately 1.5% of missiles launched actually reaching the target to somewhere approaching 20%. In 6 months, Iran had increased its ability to strike this specific installation by more than 10 times. That is not gradual improvement. That is a step change in military capability. What made the change so significant was not merely that Iran fired more missiles. It was that Iran fired different missiles in deliberately calculated sequences. Drones with 8-hour flight times, cruise missiles with 2.5-hour flight times, and ballistic missiles with 12-minute flight times were all timed to arrive at Nevatim within seconds of each other, saturating the defensive engagement window and forcing the Arrow system to simultaneously process multiple threat types from multiple vectors. That is not improvisation born of desperation. That is the product of deliberate operational learning, refined across multiple engagements by an organization that understood the physics and logistics of air defense better than most Western analysts had been willing to credit the IRGC with understanding. Then came June 2025 and the 12-day war. Israel initiated that conflict with a surprise assault on Iranian military and nuclear facilities, killing several senior IRGC commanders and at least 10 leading nuclear scientists. Iran retaliated with over 550 ballistic missiles and more than 1,000 suicide drones. This time, 6 missiles directly impacted 5 military and intelligence facilities inside Israel, including Tel Nof Air Base and Camp Glilo, the main operating base for Israel's Elite Signals Intelligence Unit 8200. Independent satellite data analysis described several of these impacts as hitting their targets with remarkable accuracy. And then came the detail that should have permanently altered the international conversation about whether this conflict was strategically manageable. The Wall Street Journal reported that, in the final days of the 12-day war, Israel's inventory of defensive interceptors was not strained. It was depleting. The Arrow system, the only layer of the defense architecture capable of intercepting Iran's medium and long-range ballistic missiles at the altitudes where interception is most effective, was running critically low on available rounds. That is the real reason a ceasefire was agreed under American pressure on June 24, 2025. Not because the military objectives had been achieved, because the interceptors were running out, and Iran had learned precisely how to make that happen. In the process, Iran's missile strike success rate doubled within that single 12-day engagement, from 8% to 16%. Now we are in the current war, and the situation is more serious than any military press conference has fully communicated to the public. What is being called Operation True Promise 4 began on February 28, 2026, when the United States and Israel launched coordinated strikes against Iranian nuclear and military infrastructure in what Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth described as the most lethal and most precise aerial operation in history. Iran named its response in the same tradition as its 3 previous operations, and immediately began targeting Nevatim again. In the opening hours of Iranian retaliation, the IRGC launched approximately 162 ballistic missiles directly at Israel, representing 39% of its total initial barrage, while simultaneously firing 167 missiles at the United Arab Emirates and 46 at Qatar. Iran also expanded its targeting to maritime traffic, launching attacks against commercial vessels in the Strait of Hormuz and the Persian Gulf, and began striking American military installations across at least 27 bases spread throughout the region. The depletion mathematics of this expanded campaign are genuinely alarming. The Iranian strategy appears deliberately designed to force simultaneous interceptor expenditure across 9 different countries and multiple theaters of operation, consuming stockpiles that were already under pressure from the 12-day war of June 2025, at a rate that outpaces manufacturing replacement capacity. General Dan Kane, the top American military officer, confirmed that the United States had intercepted hundreds of Iranian ballistic missiles targeting American forces and regional partners since the start of the war. Those intercepts were operationally successful in the narrow sense that they prevented missiles from striking their intended targets. But every successful intercept comes at the cost of an expensive, high-technology interceptor round that is in critically short supply and cannot be rapidly replaced. An anonymous senior American defense official, speaking to international media, put it plainly. The questions being asked in the Pentagon are not about whether the intercepts are working. They are working. The questions are about how long the stockpiles last in a war that could continue for weeks or far longer. The Arrow 3 exo-atmospheric intercept layer, the most capable and most resource-intensive component of the entire defense architecture, consumed between 60 and 70% of available rounds in the October 2024 engagement alone. Iran's newer missile systems, including the Khorramshahr 4 variant and the Fatah series, incorporate maneuvering re-entry vehicles, warheads that deviate from predictable parabolic flight paths in the final seconds before impact by performing lateral accelerations that reduce the Arrow 3's hit-to-kill probability from approximately 89% in mid-course interception to somewhere between 65 and 70% at lower altitudes. The next-generation Arrow 4 interceptor, specifically designed to counter these maneuvering warheads, has been in accelerated development since the October 2024 strikes. But Arrow 4 is not yet deployed. And this war is being fought right now with Arrow 2 and Arrow 3 stocks that are already under severe pressure. Stocks whose manufacturing supply chain involves rare earth materials that China has now restricted for military export use. The IDF confirmed it has destroyed 300 Iranian missile launchers since the start of the current war, consistent with Israeli media reports of a 70% reduction in Iranian missile fire toward Israel compared to the opening days of the conflict. That 70% reduction is being presented as proof that the campaign is succeeding. And it is succeeding in the narrow sense that fewer missiles are being launched per day than in the first 48 hours of Iranian retaliation. But the interceptors consumed to achieve that reduction represent inventory that cannot be quickly rebuilt, and 40% of Iranian missile capability remains intact and operational. And as the past 2 years have documented with satellite-verified certainty, Iran can hit Nevatim when it fires in sufficient numbers, with sufficiently sophisticated sequencing. The learning curve of Iranian targeting accuracy runs in one direction. The supply curve of available Israeli interceptors runs in the opposite direction. Those two trajectories are on a collision course that no amount of successful military messaging can alter. The Nevatim base commander gave a media interview this week describing the moment an F-35I Adir shot down an Iranian Yak-130 fighter jet, the first air-to-air kill by an F-35 in combat anywhere in the world, and the first Israeli downing of an enemy-manned aircraft since 1985. He described Israeli air superiority over Iranian territory as total, with dozens of Israeli aircraft operating over Iran at any given moment. That may be entirely accurate, and yet simultaneously, documented in independent satellite imagery and confirmed in the operational record of 4 separate escalation cycles, the base from which those F-35s operate has absorbed Iranian ballistic missile strikes in every single operation since April 2024. Iran's hit rate at Nevatim has gone from 5 missiles reaching target in April 2024 to potentially 40 in October 2024. To documented precision hits on Tel Nof and Unit 8200 in June 2025, to the current campaign in which Iran is firing 162 ballistic missiles at Israel in a single barrage, while simultaneously attacking 9 other countries and threatening the world's most critical energy waterway. Israel's military chief of staff stated this week that Israel has destroyed 80% of Iran's air defenses and at least 60% of its missile launching capability. If accurate, those are militarily significant numbers, but they leave 40% of Iranian missile capability intact, and 40% of a force that has doubled its penetration rate in a single engagement and increased its accuracy tenfold across 4 operations is still a force capable of doing things to Nevatim's runway infrastructure, to its hangar facilities, to its fleet of F-35s, and to Tel Nof's stored contents that no military spokesman has been fully honest with the public about. The questions that the people operating these weapon systems ask themselves every single day are the same questions this entire conflict has not yet answered. What happens to the strategic balance of the Middle East if Iran succeeds in seriously degrading the Nevatim F-35 fleet? What happens if the runway infrastructure becomes non-operational? What happens if Tel Nof is struck with the kind of accuracy that produces not secondary explosions from stored conventional munitions, but something far worse? These are not questions designed to generate anxiety. They are the questions that demand to be asked loudly and publicly, without the comfortable reassurance that technological superiority automatically guarantees strategic security. The version of this war being measured in intercepted missiles and destroyed launchers is only half the picture. The half that is harder to find, but more important to understand, is the version measured in depleted interceptor stockpiles, hangars with holes in their roofs, secondary explosions at a facility believed to house nuclear weapons, and an Iranian missile program that has been learning, adapting, and improving with every single exchange of fire for 2 consecutive years. That learning curve does not stop, and the stockpile math does not lie.